Hello again, watch friends. Welcome back. I think most watch collectors, and even non-collectors, will agree that many watches tell a story. In fact, I would argue that most watches have a story to tell. Whether it was the watch you were wearing when your first daughter or son was born, or a watch that was handed down from a parent or grandparent, or even the first watch you ever bought, there's probably a story there. Sometimes the story is well known and may even be oft repeated as a family remembrance. Other times there may be a story, but only a piece of it is known, and perhaps the remaining questions about the watch or its provenance outnumber the answers. Finally, the stories behind the watches may be either private or public. Some examples that come to mind of a public story include the first iteration of a particular reference or ownership by a famous person. These two vintage Seiko watches from 1967 through 1973 all have a story to tell. Allow me to share with you the stories of these interesting and unique watches. You're looking at the Seiko Bell-Matic 4006-7010. Alarms are ubiquitous now. We have them on microwave ovens, smartphones, and a variety of quartz, and usually digital watches, among other things. But in the summer of 1967, when this particular mechanical alarm watch was made, the watch was an example of a watchmaker's technical prowess. It was quite a remarkable complication, and available on many mainstream affordable watches during the 1950s through the 1970s. When digital quartz watches started arriving in the late 70s, alarms were commonplace. Today, you can buy a $10 digital watch that has at least one alarm, spend a little bit more, and you get multiple alarm functionality. This Seiko Bell-Matic is a day-date alarm using the 4006 movement. The 4005 movement is a date-only version. Seiko manufactured this watch in various models and styles for 12 years, from 1966 to 1978. You don't see many mechanical alarm watches anymore, and when you do, they're expensive. I'm thinking of watches like Eterna, which might be in the low thousands, and Jaeger-LeCoultre, which is in the high thousands, just to name a couple. So this watch has a diameter of a little more than 38 millimeters. It has a thickness of 13.2 millimeters. So it's not all that thick, although it's thicker than most dress watches. This is really a sports watch. The lug width is 18.6 millimeters, so probably a 19 would fit. You might have to manipulate a little bit to get it to fit. And the lug-to-lug distance from here to here, from this point to this point, is only 42.6 millimeters. So it's a fairly short watch. Fits nicely because it has slightly curved lugs, and it has a real nice vintage look to it. The watch has no manual wind. The mainspring is wound via motion on the rotor, so movement, like any other automatic watch, moves the rotor winds the mainspring. There's a separate alarm spring which is wound by the crown, and the crown has three positions. The N is to wind the alarm spring. The middle is to set the alarm, and when you set the alarm, it only goes in an anti-clockwise direction. And when you pull the crown fully out to the third position, you can set the time. So before we go any further, let's check out the alarm. So this alarm pusher at 2 o'clock right here, you can see that the alarm is already set for 7 o'clock. That's this little red indicator here. Let me just demonstrate how you set that. So I pulled the crown out to the middle position. I'm moving it, and you can see the alarm set works in a anti-clockwise direction. Let's set it to 7 o'clock, which I just did. Let me pull the alarm pusher out to arm the alarm. And let me now set the time to move to the alarm so you can hear what it sounds like. And I'm going to hold it up to the microphone so you can hear the alarm. So it only lasts about 10 seconds. It isn't particularly loud. It does vibrate, and I've worn this on the wrist when the alarm's gone off, so you can feel the vibration more so than actually hearing the alarm at this point. The day is set by using the hour hand. So the only way to change the day is to pull the alarm out, rotate the time, and twice around. See, right now it says Wednesday. Here we go. Now it's going to Thursday. And then if I go around two more times, I won't bore you with that procedure, it would change the day to Friday. However, the crown at 2 o'clock, which I've already mentioned and demonstrated how it enables and disables the alarm, has a quick set function for the date, which is rather clever. So right now you can see that the date is the 9th. If I push in with my fingernail, you can see now the date is 10. So I can advance the date one date at a time by pushing in on the alarm crown. Okay. That quick set date change function is kind of neat, and actually it's quite common on many Seiko watches of this era. So how does the alarm function work? Well, the second mainspring, or alarm spring, drives a little wheel that makes the hammer go back and forth, which is actually similar to how the escapement makes the pallet fork oscillate. At the designated alarm time, the hammer hits a little spring, another spring, to make the noise. So as you saw, it's not all that loud, but it does vibrate and can be useful. I like the fact that this watch has been worn. It's not a safe queen by any means, and it's a watch that has been worn by several people, and now it's going to be worn by me. If the alarm function in itself is not interesting enough, there's something even more remarkable about this watch, and that is where the special story of this watch comes in. On the clasp, on the bracelet, it reads H.R. Scheinberg, Saigon, 68. Obviously, the watch was owned and worn in Vietnam during the war, but who knows how this watch ended up in my hands. Did the original owner lose it? Did he pawn it? Did the owner pass on and this watch was handed down to the family and they sold it? Or maybe they lost it? This is the partial story, and there are many unanswered questions. I'm pretty much thinking that we'll never know the answers to these questions. So there it is, the Bell-Matic alarm watch. The Seiko 6139-6002 chronograph. Many watch collectors are interested in aviation-related watches. There are many storied examples of these, from Charles Lindbergh's pilot watch to flaggers that were used by the German Luftwaffe in World War II. Another interesting category is space-related watches. Most of us know the story of the first watch to be worn on the moon, the Omega Speedmaster in 1969 by Neil Armstrong. But the Speedmaster was a manual wind watch. The first automatic chronograph in space is a matter of debate. In 1985, German astronaut Reinhard Führer wore a SIN 140 during the Spacelab D1 mission. However, the ZIN was not the first automatic chrono in space. This honor belongs to the Seiko 6139-6002, otherwise known as the Pogue. According to Colonel Pogue, a NASA astronaut on the 1973 Skylab 4 mission, he purchased the 6139 personally at the PX at Ellington Air Force Base and used it extensively during his training. Although the watch wasn't flight approved by NASA, Colonel Pogue brought the watch with him as part of his personal kit on that flight. During the 84-day flight, which was the third and last mission on the United States' first space station, Pogue used the Seiko to time engine burns, and according to him, it operated flawlessly. He was issued a NASA-approved Speedmaster, which he used for several spacewalks. The 6139 was Seiko's first automatic chronograph. It has a 30-minute counter at 6 o'clock, no seconds, or other subdial. At 3 o'clock is a day-date complication with separate framing. An internally rotating bezel, or scale, operated by the crown, provides a tachymeter function. Many variants of this model were made, but this particular model is from 1973, based on the serial number. If we look closely at the watch, you can see that it's got a diameter of 41 millimeters. It's 13.9 millimeters thick. The lug width is 17.6 millimeters. Let's call it 18 millimeters. And the lug-to-lug distance is 46.8 millimeters. The chronograph is operated by the two pushers on the right-hand side, one at 2 o'clock and one at 4 o'clock. The 2 o'clock starts and stops the movement of the timer. At 4 o'clock, when I press that pusher, it resets the chrono back to 0. And I can start it again. This watch has Seiko's unique and interesting day and date setting function. If I push in on the crown, if I push it in just one notch, you can see that the date changes. I can advance it one date at a time. And if I push it in all the way, the day changes. So a very interesting way of being able to change the date and time. As I mentioned, if I rotate the crown, you can see that the inner bezel moves. I can move forward or backward. Another interesting approach to the tachymeter function, rather than having a movable bezel. bracelet is a nice enough bracelet. Some people complain about Seiko bracelets. Sometimes they catch the hairs on your wrist. It's a simple fold-over clasp. Notice that it's signed Seiko on the clasp. Fold it over, and it snaps into position. To open it, you pull on this piece here, opens it right up. So, an interesting watch with an interesting story. And the other good news is that a Pogue watch like this can be picked up in good to excellent condition for anywhere from $400 to $800 on various websites and forums. It's not cheap, but it's not expensive either, especially for a watch with a huge history and that can be worn and used today just as it was done 50 odd years ago. Very attractive watch, and definitely, when I've worn it, quite the conversation piece. Often, a watch does not reveal all of its secrets, and one is left without closure and some outstanding questions. Other times, one gets lucky, such as the case with this Bell-Matic, sort of. I was able to find and contact the original owner, Mr. Haskell Scheinberg. Other than being quite surprised to receive my call, I was hoping he didn't think it was a sales call, and I definitely did not call at dinner time. He was willing to spend a few minutes to talk with me. Mr. Scheinberg now lives in Littleton, Colorado, and I learned that he is not a watch enthusiast per se, and not a watch collector. He's a normal guy that wears a watch so that, in his words, he can be on time for appointments. Mr. Scheinberg served in the Air Force and spent a year in Vietnam from September 1967 to September 1968. He told me that he bought the Bell-Matic at the BX, the Base Exchange, and that he was always losing watches, partly due to the fact that he was in a special unit called the Special Activities Group of the Air Force that moved around quite a lot, and that he and his fellow airmen often lost or had stolen personal items during their moves. Regarding this particular watch, Mr. Scheinberg said that he probably had it engraved after the Tet Offensive, but the watch was either lost or stolen soon afterwards. He said he came home from his tour in Vietnam with another watch and has no idea how the watch ended up in the U.S. Now, I can trace the provenance of this watch back to 3 owners. The person I bought it from, who he bought it from, and who he bought it from. But no one has a clue as to the watch's journey or owners prior to that point. So, some of the questions have been answered, but we still don't know how the watch made it from Saigon or thereabouts to the United States. I guess we'll never know. So there you have it. 2 watches, each with an interesting story. Feel free to share your watch's interesting story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Of course, you can click on subscribe to be notified of future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.